Hi, I'm Karen,
I'm Emma.
I'm Ash.
and this is Bitchcraft, Women and the Practice. Witchcraft has long been used as a way to punish women who step outside of their supposed roles, but in recent times, many women are reclaiming the practice as a way of empowerment. However, the practice of witchcraft is still heavily stigmatized and not well discussed in the education system.
So we're going to start off with just like a basic history of witchcraft. So no one knows when the practice really started, but obviously like paganism and all that is very old. But one of the earliest references to a witch, as we would think of it, is in 1 Samuel, which was probably written between 931 BC and 721 BC. And it's just a short story about King Saul trying to contact a witch in order to see the future. In the olden days, witches were not always thought to be evil, but they were more like spiritual healers or wise women, and many witches. But as time progressed, many witches were also thought to work with the devil in order to gain their powers, which is a belief that came from the Catholic Church. So, witch hunts first began in Europe, and they occurred mostly from the 14th century to the 17th century. What really kicked them off, however, was the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum in 1480, which basically demonized witches and explained how they worked with the devil. People who were more likely to be accused of witches were single women, widows, and women who were living on the fringes of society and didn't, vibe with the like social norms of the time. Between 1500 and 1660, about 80,000 people were put to death and tortured, and about 80% of these people were women. Like I said, at this time, witches were demonized by the Catholic Church and seen as in league with the devil, even though most of the people who were executed at these times weren't actual witches. Around the same time as in Europe, America began to fall into a witch craze, mostly from European influences, because most of the people that came to America were Puritans. The most well-known trial in America was in Salem, Massachusetts, and this was odd because these trials were actually led by two young girls instead of men in places of power. And a lot of people think that maybe there was something up with the bread there, like there was a bacteria that mimicked the effects of LSD or something like that, but they would fall into fits in the courtroom and they would accuse lots of women of being in league with the devil. About 115 people were accused, 150, my bad, and 18 were put to death. Most of them were women, however, 6 of them were men. So stigmas associated with witches. One stereotype when you think of witches is the long, crooked nose, like in this picture, and that's actually tied up in anti-Semitism. So when witches became like subjects of movies and stuff, they were usually coded to look Jewish to, inflate the anti-Semitism of the time. One of the signs of a witch that I found interesting was an extra nipple, which was supposed to allow the witch to feed her familiar and was called a witch's mark. And most witches are thought to be women, and even though in the older trials men were accused and killed, once again, the majority of people killed were women. So a lot of people believe that witchcraft is linked to the devil, and that those who practice witchcraft are serving the devil and they like sell their soul or something similar in order to get their powers, and then they use those to harm or lure others into the practice. Women were easy targets for witchcraft in those days because they were thought to be more inferior and weak-willed than men, and therefore more easy to be lured by the devil. And witches were also supposed to be full of sinful feelings such as lust. And here are the references for my slides.
So today's witchcraft, what is it? So in better lack of terms, the craft, that is witchcraft, is essentially the fusion of pre-Christian European nature religions and also medieval Western magic practices. It also incorporates other cultures' magic practices as well. For example, indigenous rituals and beliefs, same way with Africans and other ethnic groups like Celtic or even Germanian. There are different practices of witchcraft. So they're my favorites, which are crystals and herbology, because I'm in love with plants. There's also tarot reading, deity worship, which can be of Greek gods, Norse gods, Roman gods, or any type of other gods that relate to a certain culture. There's also the work of shadow and energy. There's divination and meditation, which kind of goes along with astral projection. There's spell work, so this is where you're going to do your spells like hexes and other spell work. There's also necromancy, which is kind of associated with raising the dead, but also has different aspects of it as well. And a personal favorite is cleansing rituals. So this can correlate with mostly all of this. Typically, I do my cleansing rituals with crystals, incense, and candle magic. But there are different ways that religions practice these but there are different ways that religions practice these crafts. What beliefs are involved in witchcraft? Well, some of the main ones you can think of is actually Christianity. We have paganism, Wiccan, Neo-Druidism, Satanism, Hellenism, which is the revival of the ancient Greek religion. And we have many more. And one of ones that Karen brought up was Santeria. If you want to go ahead and explain that, Karen.
Yeah, so Santeria is a religion that is essentially was founded in the Caribbean, so mostly like Cuba, Puerto Rico, and I believe the Dominican Republic as well. So that's why I'm aware of it. Being Puerto Rican, I don't know anyone personally that practices, but I just know of the culture, have heard of it a bit. And so, from what my understanding is that it's rooted in the Yoruba religion of West Africa, I believe. So, when the slaves were brought to the Caribbean to work on the sugarcane plantations, they brought those deities and those cultures and rituals and practices, and it was mixed with Catholicism from the Spaniards, and it became its own religion itself.
Thank you, Karen. So there's other religions that can practice the craft due to the fact that witchcraft is heavily decentralized, meaning that each individual can decide what witchcraft means to them and also which practices they want to conduct. So everything's not set in stone, and the witchcraft can be personalized to where they see fit. So during the Me Too movement and the feminist movements, the practice has begun to be linked to female oppression and also kind of help. I'm restarting the slide. 1, 2, 3. So with the feminist movement and the Me Too movement, the practices began to be linked to female oppression, and the craft also demonstrated this when women were persecuted, mostly during the witch trials. So the ways that witchcraft can help women is it can provide personal empowerment. It also can provide an identification with a deity that helps protect us and represent us. This can be Greek gods, Norse gods, any deity that's of higher power. Another way witchcraft helps us is that it's a way to connect more strongly with nature. This will increase our spirituality and we just feel more connected. Speaking of connections, it also provides a community. So this community can be of wise women, medicine women, healers, and even the witches that have come before us. And the last thing that witchcraft helps with is simple everyday rituals that feed our spirituality. So this can be cleansing the room, meditation to help with our mental well-being. And at the end of the day, these practices have helped empower women and further exemplify the how female oppression has negatively affected the woman population. So the resurgence, one of the things that made witchcraft more popularized in modern day is actually cinema, TV shows, and even modern literature. So some of the examples of these is Harry Potter. That's a very popular one. Sabrina the Witch, Charmed, and even things like Rick Riordan's The Lightning Thief give Greek gods insertion in that. Also, the research also stems from commercialization of Halloween, and most witchcraft religions that are associated, it typically use Halloween as Samhain, side note. But this commercialization of Halloween connects to movies such as Halloween Town, Twitches 2, and even in like your everyday series, there's always that Halloween episode. But the use of this commercialization of Halloween is to introduce different ideals of witches, and this allowed for media to kind of pop off from it and allowed for more representation for women to identify too. And these are my resources. Each picture has their own site, which you can click on, and the body copy has the resource I derived the information from.
So for education, one thing that should be stressed more often in the public school system is tolerance for other worldviews, other religions, and other belief systems. And often it stems from a Christian point of view, even though public schools are supposed to be more secular. And so we kind of gloss over these other religions and spiritualities. So if education on these different beliefs were provided, then it'll establish an environment of tolerance and respect for people that think differently than us, and the different values that exist in other cultures that we can adopt into our own lives. So for the history portion of education, it is widely believed that the witches of Salem were burned, when in reality, most of them were hanged. And this belief comes from the fact that in Europe, the witch trials, the preferred method of execution was burning, because in Catholicism, they believe that drawing blood is a sin, and also that fire was a way to purify them. But in the US, it was hangings because of more Protestant origins. And so this is just an example of the failing of the American public school system, and not being able to accurately teach these historical events, and not really focusing or spending a lot of time on these events and the significance of what they meant and why they happened, and also no discussion being facilitated on how these events of the Salem witch trials specifically actually targeted women for drifting from the norm, from societal norms. So women that were like spinsters, unmarried, they were easy targets because they were outliers. So it is important to learn the history of witchcraft in order to realize that the many witch trials that have occurred in the past were not an actual attack on witchcraft itself, but that they were a way of oppressing women and keeping them more submissive. So why does this matter? bringing awareness to the topic will allow for further understanding of the practice and therefore expand students' worldviews instead of having just a purely Christian point of view and focus. And so that'll allow them to make their own decisions and adopt the new values and new ideas that they want to live by themselves. And these are my sources.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.